Today I set out to create a primitive ecosystem, a world covered in moss, with plants growing out of control and underground creatures slowly emerging. Everything seemed calm until I introduced a predator and the balance began to crack. In the end, something happened and wiped it all away. I had an old terrarium, forgotten and dusty, and I decided to turn it into an experiment. Something I had never tried before, a primitive ecosystem. I started with expanded clay balls for drainage, then added coconut fiber, maybe too much, some vermiculite to hold moisture, and finally a layer of peat moss to bring it all to life. I bought a few plants, all suited for indoor life. I could only hope they would grow, or at least adapt to the new soil. They would be more than decoration. They'd be home, shelter, and maybe the last refuge for what was coming next. The terrarium was starting to take shape. Each plant seemed to settle in, and finally the space felt like an ecosystem. But something was still missing, so I added a carnivorous plant, not just for its looks, but to help control the tiny inhabitants that were coming. Something was still missing, a touch of green, more life. So I added a few seeds. With luck, they'd help stabilize the soil, offer shade, and feed those who would soon walk across it. Then, just a little water, and the magic began. I sat back and watched as the grass slowly pushed through. The grass had already grown, and somehow moss began spreading through every corner. The landscape was changing, and it was time to add shelter. I placed a couple of caves, small gateways to the underground, that would shape the first stories of this new world. The first colonizers of this new primitive world were about to enter. They were springtails, tiny, almost invisible soil invertebrates that feed on decaying matter and help keep the balance. They're the ones who make everything work, without anyone noticing. Entire families of springtails explored every corner, and the funny thing is, I had no idea there were that many when I bought them. Then came a new agent of the underground, silent, discreet, but essential. The earthworm, one of the oldest engineers on the planet. It has no eyes, yet it senses everything. It moves underground, creating tunnels, shifting nutrients, and transforming the soil with every move. Without it, the ground simply wouldn't breathe. It spent several minutes exploring everything, as if inspecting its new home, or judging my decoration. Funny thing is, earthworms can have up to 5 hearts. In the end, it found its place and slipped underground. It made me a little sad to think I might never see it again. Days later, the greatest enemy of any terrarium appeared. A white fungus, like living fuzz, spreading out of control. The springtails were doing their best, but it wasn't enough. So I stepped in, introducing new creatures that could make a difference. It was time for the woodlice, small but with a crucial mission. They feed on decomposing matter and act as the cleaners of this ecosystem. And then I found this. It was a millipede, and I had no idea how it got here. Luck was on my side because these creatures share the woodlice's mission, but in their own way. They move through the moisture, breaking down larger debris and helping oxygen reach the base of the ecosystem. There's something about millipedes that's hard to ignore. Watching one, you're not sure whether to feel curious or just a slight chill. But pay close attention to this creature, a spider I never introduced. It probably came hidden in the soil or traveled in with one of the plants. A long-legged one, harmless, yet always showing up where you least expect it. Everything was going smoothly, maybe too smoothly, but before the soil creatures could reproduce out of control, I introduced a final hunter, a presence that would completely shift the balance, the Black Widow. The Black Widow was now inside, but could it adapt to this primitive ecosystem? It doesn't need to run or chase, it just waits and lets its ultra-sticky web do the rest. Pay close attention to this spectacular moment. A fly has entered the Black Widow's territory, unaware of the danger it's in. They're fast, hard to catch, but spiders have their own methods, and patience often pays off. The moment of capture was so fast, the camera didn't even catch it. But what followed was even more chilling. Suspended in her web, the Black Widow wraps her prey in an aerial dance, straight out of a nightmare. If you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing. It would help me a lot. These videos take many hours to make, and I truly appreciate it. We realize we're witnessing a true master weaver, because even though her movements seem slow, her precision when launching silk is beyond normal. Few people know this, but this spider can go weeks without eating. Its metabolism is so slow and efficient that it can survive on just the occasional tiny insect, able to remain completely still for days without wasting a single drop of energy. Curiously, now that it knows there's food in this place, it's begun to build its fortress, a bastion of invisible threads stretched in all directions, working as an early warning system. Every vibration, every movement will be registered, and anyone who dares to get close will be detected long before they even realize it. I decided to run a small experiment. Noticing that the trapped fly was fairly large, I wondered how much one of her threads could really hold. They looked surprisingly strong, so I started adding weight, little by little, pushing its resistance to the limit. This spider's web is made primarily of proteins called fibroins, arranged into such complex structures that, by weight, they can be stronger than steel. And the most curious part is that it produces it all from its own body with precision and complete control. Finally, the thread snapped, and with it, the experiment came to an end. But pay attention, because balance was far from guaranteed. Sometime later, even though the spider was still present and had caught a few more insects, the woodlice kept multiplying nonstop. The ecosystem was beginning to tilt, and I knew it was time to step in. Not even the carnivorous plant, a specialist in catching all kinds of arthropods, could stop them. The woodlice kept growing in number, as if nothing could hold them back. Then came the final, an ultimate hunter, a creature unlike anything before, with presence, strength, and a role that would completely shift the ecosystem's dynamic. The vampire crab, which oddly enough seemed to enjoy playing among the plants. But don't be fooled by its calm appearance. They're omnivores, feeding on almost anything, from plant matter to insects, and even carrion if necessary. Everything seemed in order within this primitive ecosystem. The plants were thriving, the creatures roamed, and for a moment, everything felt in harmony. And then, I saw something. A millipede had crossed the line. Not only had it wandered dangerously close to the spider's territory, it stepped right onto one of her threads, setting off all the alarms. The spider already knew it was there. Although the millipede was strong, it was completely under the spider's control. That web was never meant for something like him to walk on, and the spider didn't hesitate. She descended with purpose and began wrapping him, thread by thread, with the intention of immobilizing him completely. It was a moment of peak tension. I didn't know if the millipede understood what was happening, but the spider did. She reinforced each anchor point with precision, tightening the threads like she was setting a final trap, and everything was unfolding in absolute silence. And just when the spider seemed to have her meal secured, confident and in control, the unexpected happened. Against all odds, the millipede found strength from somewhere and began to break free. Slowly but steadily, it started tearing through the threads, one by one. It managed to escape just in time. One more second, and it might not have made it. But something truly terrible was about to happen. Something that would shatter the fragile piece that had taken so long to build. and threatened to wipe out everything in its path. The entire ecosystem was hanging by a thread. A storm heavy with relentless rain began flooding everything. Water rushed through every corner, thrashing the vegetation without mercy. Some creatures tried to find shelter, but it might have been too late. The storm had already begun.